Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the public health leaders, healthcare workers, and volunteer citizens of Bethel County Census area for joining me this morning as I discuss the ricin toxin and how we can best prepare ourselves to handle a poisoning event. First things first, we need to define ricin. Ricin is a carbohydrate-binding protein found in the seeds of the castor oil plant, a plant grown across the world for both agricultural and ornamental use. This protein is a highly potent toxin with an estimated lethal oral dose being 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight. Ricin acts as a ribosome inactivating protein. As we will see in the next slide, shutting down a cell's ribosomes results in catastrophic damage to the cell and ultimately the organ it comprises. As mentioned in the previous slide, ricin poisons by inactivating a cell's ribosomes. Let's look at how that takes place. For the toxicity of ricin to affect a human, the protein must first enter a cell. Ricin accomplishes this by using one of its two protein chains, ricin toxin B chain, to bind the surface of a eukaryotic cell and then enter said cell. Once inside the cytoplasm, ricin toxin B chain cleaves itself from ricin toxin A chain. Now separate and free-floating in the cell, ricin toxin A chain binds to the 60S subunit of the eukaryotic ribosome and cleaves a key glycosidic bond. Ricin toxin A chain continues to inactivate the eukaryotic ribosome by engaging in rRNA depurination, which renders the ribosome unable to synthesize proteins needed for cellular activity. Now unable to create the proteins needed for basic cellular and metabolic function, the cell dies. A single ricin toxin A chain is able to inactivate 1,500 ribosomes per minute. This in turn renders a small dose of ricin able to cause cell death in large quantities. Ultimately, cell death leads to organ failure and eventually death of the poisoned individual. Let's now discuss what ricin poisoning looks like. Ricin can enter the body in three different ways: ingestion, inhalation, or injection. Ingestion of ricin causes initial symptoms in approximately 6 hours, with the worst symptoms manifesting after 4 to 5 days. Symptoms include vomiting, diarrhea, and hemorrhaging of the gastrointestinal system. If untreated, ricin ingestion can eventually lead to organ failure. Inhalation and injection of ricin is far more severe and presents the full range of symptoms within hours. These include cough, fever, and respiratory failure in the case of inhalation, and local tissue necrosis and organ failure if poisoned by injection. If ricin inhalation or injection is caught in time, the poisoned individual can survive. However, organ damage and failure is very common. Finally, let's establish how to best prevent a ricin poisoning event or death. First, a strong protocol should be in place to address a ricin poisoning event. This looks like both the Poison Control Center and Bethel County Census area healthcare workers being well trained to identify early symptoms of ricin poisoning, as well as appropriate intake questions that could determine if there was ricin ingestion or inhalation. Next, the response to a ricin poisoning event should be swift and expansive. As there is no antidote to the ricin toxin, medical providers can only treat the symptoms that arise by supplying oxygen, fluids, and performing stomach lavage in the case of an ingestion event. Lastly, as ricin is incredibly easy to acquire and isolate through the purchase of castor beans and online instruction guides, community outreach via the Alaska Public Health Department should work to warn parents and guardians of ricin poisoning signs and symptoms that present in their children. Thank you all for being here today to learn about the dangers of ricin and how best to prevent a poisoning event.